A very good morning to everyone. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Okay. Welcome back everyone to this 3-day ICSSR sponsored seminar on the topic Thinking Dynamic Shifts, Religion, Gender in Representations of Northeast India. I am Chubamila, Assistant Professor, Department of English, Tetsu College, and I will be the chairperson for this session. It is my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, Professor Rakhee Kalita Moral, who is the Dean and the Faculty of Humanities, Languages, Literature and Linguistics, Cotton University, Guwahati. She is known for her work on women in conflict and Northeast India studies and has published in various national, international journals and books such as At the Frontier and Beyond, Gender and Society in Northeast India, to name a few. Dr. Morrell has been a part of an international research consortium, Humanities Across Borders, and has been a visiting faculty with the Center for the Study of Social Systems. And Dr. Morrell is also closely engaged with the European Association for South Asia Studies, which is in Germany, and has most recently edited South Asian Review's special issue on Northeast India's Anglophone Literatures 2023, Taylor and Francis, UK. She also has been awarded Wiscom's Women in Security, Conflict Management and Peace National Sahas Perna Award in 2020 for her work in gender equity and interventions towards fostering gender justice in higher education campuses in Northeast India. So without further ado, ma'am, I would hand over the time to you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. The chair, Chubamenla TC. Uh, we are, I think, at the end of the last day of the 3-day ICSSR seminar that Tetsu College has organized. Uh, and I'm really glad that we've been, in the last 2 days, uh, members of the organizing committee and participants of this seminar, national seminar sponsored by ICSSR, has been able to look at shifts and what has been called dynamic shifts, religion and gender in representations of Northeast India. So, uh, while today's keynote would obviously kind of navigate around these issues, I am basically concerned in today's talk about, how we are approaching gender from Northeast India. What are the gendered approaches from this region? And how do they intersect with the idea of uh, community, of literature, of space, very importantly, because I think we are really looking at how our representations, whether they be from literature, culture, our ways of living, the community, even politics for that matter, how do they finally bring up our positionalities? How does gender actually engage from the region? So thank you very much, Tetso College, for having invited me to this engagement, which I think must have been wonderful for the last 2 days that you've been working on different themes and different panels, and I can see there's a rich variety. I'm sure it must have addressed a lot of our major concerns. May I take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this national seminar, ICSSR, as well as my chair, Chubamenla, the English department of Tetso College. Uh, I'm also grateful to Put Chong, who has been able to, keep the correspondence going for quite some time since I agreed to be on this um, wonderful event. Thank you very much, and good morning to all. Chubamela, can I have just the slide, the opening title, and then I'll go on to uh, talking a little more in a more extended manner. So, what I call gendered approaches to Northeast India, uh, and I said that I am speaking from the lens of literature, community, and therefore pedagogy, because we are all engaged from an academic space. Okay, so one of the important things that has happened with us in the Northeast is that our feminist practices and our oral cultures have been typical and have been distinctive because of the geographies from which they emerge. The environment itself is an entity which, as one very important feminist thinker of recent times calls the epistemological space, this is where several actors come together, humans, non humans, material, mythic, cosmic, especially because, and I refer to this because this epistemological space is important in deriving for us how, for example, we can think through the community, think through our practices. In this case, religion has been important, although I will not dwell a lot on religion as my uh, title is already gesturing. I would therefore like to talk about the idea of the community and our gendered representations in literature, and therefore finally arrive at a pedagogy of Northeast feminism or a gendered pedagogy. Temshula Au, poet and writer from your region, who I have been very, very fond of. There's been great admiration for Tamshila Au, who I knew personally, and who had in the past three and a half, almost 4 decades, been regarded as a seminal voice from Northeast India. I think she observed how women of her tribe appropriate the power of the world, and it's a power that is typically invested in males through supernatural agency, in imaginative tales and fiction. I think she does a very wonderful theory of this on in her work exactly 10 years ago on being a naga. And I'm sure everyone in this audience, or most of us in this audience, have been familiar with what Temshila meant when she talks about Naga oral literature and, the community, the stories from the community in which a woman can transform herself. This is, of course, part mythology, part spiritual religious belief, how she turns herself to a beast in order to, escape an oppressive husband. And by virtue of being a form which is not human or other than human, she re enters the realm of nature, which is why, right at the beginning, I mentioned that in this case, when we study or when we read Northeast India, it's very important also to engage with the environment. Uh, the environment then that shapes the community. So our beliefs, our religious faith, our customs, our daily, our everyday practices, these allow us to semiotically participate in a universe, which is, a larger kind of cosmic space. And I also think that, uh, it she reinforces this connection between being corporeal, human, physical, and the immediate cosmos of the mystical, of the more than human, which therefore then borders on religious or spiritual ideas, which is something that must have been deliberated on in the past 2 days. And I want to enter, this is my point of entry, that in conclusion, what Temshila Au talks about in this on being a Naga, and she explains that, Naga oral literature, for example, has been able to include, you know, and enable an imaginative and a very intuitive kind of dialogue with traditional ways of life, which includes what can be called religious. And I don't know how religion can be really addressed in a talk like this, because I mean religion is so vast. So I will not dare to kind of uh, talk about or summarize what religion could mean, but I'm definitely touching on some of these inherent linkages between what a custom, what everyday practice, what mythological and community beliefs, how these can create a native folk culture and then connect us to a larger audience, to a larger universe. And what is also pertinent, I think, is that because it is a gendered approach, because we inherently talk about how uh, not how we inherently not looking at the dominant patriarchal mode of apprehending our world in Northeast India, but we're looking at it through a gendered lens. So we have women who participate, who write, who are feminist voices. And then there is this closeness to the land, to the community, um, in which some of these, you know, intuitive, um, spiritual, even let us say mystical beliefs are grounded. And I think I would like to talk about, therefore, how the northeast of India, for example, the point of entry that I made was that this space, the northeast of India, becomes for us a very important kind of terrain from where the material, the discursive, the natural and the cultural, the biological and the textual, all of these come together to create a poetry, to create fiction. And I, because I teach literature, it's important for me to ground my talk in a politics of representation. So how do we celebrate this dual nature, culture, subject, object, mind, body, uh, to kind of remove ourselves from the essentialist pedagogy that we had inherited, the patriarchal pedagogy. So the Northeast has been in this region. I mean, we have looked at writers, poets, and thinkers who have brought us very close to these non essentialist ways of thinking. So I will talk about some of these writers and some of these literary figures who have been very important in the shift from what has been a patriarchal lens or mode of looking at our own region to an important gendered, paradigm shift. So can I have the first the slide, Chubamela? Yeah. So, early feminisms in Northeast India, if we were to trace Northeast India's feminist uh, beginnings, it's been around for more than 100 years now, and if we are to go back to some of the early political formations, then the Assam Pradeshik Mahila Samiti, the stamp that you see there, the posted stamp, is the women's rights activist Chandraprabha Saikyani from Assam, who is now a leading icon. You know, she's almost a symbolic voice for native feminisms from this part. And the Dibrugarh Mahila Samiti, which came into being in 1915. And these were spaces of agency for women who were really looking at shifts and changes uh, which could define womanhood and create new ways of being a gendered subject in late colonial Assam. And when I say Assam, you must remember that we were looking at undivided Assam of those times. We were looking at really this entire space, which is why I begin with Assam. But even earlier in Manipur, you had the Nupilan, which many of you will, of course, be aware of, in 1904, which was led by women who staged uprisings against colonial powers. And these colonial powers, mind you, were oppressively male, they were white, they were dominantly, uh, and aggressively occupational. They would take away everything that you had. So women's entry into the space was through their own native community practices, such as cultivation of rice, for example, and a rice tax which was levied on Manipuri peasants, on peasants in Manipur, was something that the women folk protested. And thereafter, of course, we've had a very long kind of journey into how women from that region have been holding their own against various differences with their, with people in the region, conflicts coming up for various other reasons. And in recent times, what we have also seen, the very sad kind of arrival of clashes between communities, between ethnicities, between religious faiths. So women have been leading here, as change makers. So since we don't have much time to go into it, and this is a keynote, I just want to throw these ideas as to how women have rendered the region uh, into a kind of space where shifts have been historical and shifts have been repetitive. We have kept on shifting the map uh, of, practices, of gendered approaches, etc. Um, yeah, and can we move to the next slide, please? Um, so let us look at the academy. So while on the one hand, we've had these historical practices, I'm also looking at how the academy, from where we speak, we speak from the space of writing, of teaching, of disseminating. So one of the very important things that happened in the academy, and I'm talking about the Global Academy, is from the 80s and after, we're looking at the last century, 80s and after, there were ways of looking at feminist movements. And while we were almost at the third and fourth waves of feminism, I don't want to go into the history of feminism, but just to kind of refer you back, uh, the history of feminism was opening itself up to the crossing of borders, and they were looking at what was essentially third world feminism. And the Global Academy, I think it witnessed the coming of feminists and third world feminists into the academy. For in case of India, for example, the Towards Equality report of the 70s, that had established the status of women. And beyond Western paradigms, there were shifts, there were stories of the arrival of women's studies, of feminist theory, of South Asian feminists, which were entering the campus. And what I'm showing here for us is a few kind of iconic works, um, both literary and um, theoretical, which also show that feminism in South Asia was beginning to, arrive by telling the world, the rest of the world, that look, our practices are different. For example, women writing in India. Okay, this is a wonderful work. So Susi Tharu So we have Chandra Talpade Mohanty, who talks about feminism without borders. And then there is a more recent work called South Asian Feminisms, which is up there on the slide. Um, so Anya Lumba and Ruchi Lucas, who are looking at these kind of native feminisms, okay, who are probably trying to engage with feminisms that are of a more native nature. So they could be distinctive because of where they emerge from. The next slide, please. So Northeast India's literary feminisms have been historically marked by women's activism. And I don't even need to go on to, this is just one example of a woman who's in the academic space, who established the first Women's Studies Center at Dibrugarh University, a professor of literature, Aparna Datta Mahanta, who not only taught literature, but taught women and, women from, and people from the other genders, from the diverse genders, to begin to, you know, think in a more active manner about shifting the gaze, about looking at differences. And so, well, the slide is just an example, so we can move the slide. And these are important ideas. So how does literature actually engage with the community? And to that extent, I think I might want to uh, dwell a little on how, in more recent times, for example, writers from the region, whether we are talking about Mizoram, whether we are talking about Manipur, whether we're talking about Nagaland, we have been developing the idea uh, of looking at our spaces other than as simply an Edenic paradise, of the older Christian civilizational ideas that these were spaces which were generally, utilitarian, that forests, nature, our spaces in the community, the terrain that we have been in, these were Edenic spaces, and you could just go into the wilderness. Now, these are being rejected so that we can see some other kinds of epiphanies, and we can look at even strange and monstrous symbolisms where women writers and women activists find different kinds of ways of looking at their land and looking at their culture. For example, ecofeminist critic, Vera Norwood, she has said in her work that women write the wilderness differently. They engage with the terrain differently. They experience an immersion rather than a confrontation. Because if you looked at the paradigmatically, if you looked at the male um, uh, gendered approach, then forests, land, rivers, mountains were all meant to be tamed. They were meant to be extracted. They were meant to be scaled. They were meant to be occupied. So this was confrontational kind of engagement with your terrain. And it was almost like using religion, for example, to obtain a certain kind of agenda. But for the other genders, for especially for women, for example, there is a certain kind of engagement which goes beyond, believing that this nature elements, these are all meant to be, you know, um, uh, to be colonized, to put it, loosely. Okay, and I think I'm very I'd love to make a point when I look at someone like Mona Zote, for example, and she writes about her Aizol, the hills, on one long sloping summer evening, in her very famous poem that is called "What Poetry Means to Me." Means to Ernestina in Peril. This was an early 21st century poem, and she said that what if Ernestina is not a name at all? I see, remember, it's a very Christian name, okay? Catholic name almost. So, what if Ernestina is not a name at all? Not even a corruption, less than a monument. She will sit pulling on one thin cigarello after another, will lift her teacup in friendly greeting to the hills and the loquacious stars, and the music will comb on through her hair, telling her poetry must be like must be raw like a side of beef, should drip blood, remind you of sweat and dusty slaughter, and the epidermal crunch and the sudden bullet to the head. So you see, this celebrated poem talks about how women also of the Northeast have engaged with various disruptions, okay, such as the different kinds of um, non-state non-state incursions, non-state uprisings, which is carried on. I mean, look at how we are in the Northeast even today. So these collective memories of violence, um, you know, these are inscribed on the feminist space, and the agency that the woman has, for example, is that she does not belong necessarily to just the religious order. She can go beyond thinking religiously, and she can actually assume a more material feminist approach, uh, while she begins to talk about, the landscapes of her region, while she looks at the overarching presence of what is primeval, what is timeless. Remember the loquacious stars and the sloping hills. And there is a continuous attempt to participate in human lives which are taken over by temporal events, such as a conflict, such as a, a natural disaster, or such as a sudden ethnic clash. Okay. Uh, I also might, since I'm talking about literature here very much, and how the gendered approach can be actually achieved through literary representation, I'm looking at the kind of agency that a poet from Assam also has. And these are, mind you, young writers, okay? I mean, of course, I started with Temshila Au, but I also would like to refer briefly to young writers. So there is this young writer from Assam, Neetu Das, who teaches in Delhi University. And in a book of poems called the Boki Poems, she talks about a similar agency that women develop. And this agency is magnified through almost a non-human kind of uh, you know uh, affinity with whatever else is natural. So the daunting idea of a woman being out there, in the wild, in the wilderness, is something that allows womanhood to transcend both biology and culture. So that you are not protected, you are not just inside, you are not just the home and the hearth, around the home and the hearth, but that the woman's defiance, which is also growing in the time of militancy. Neetu Das also talks about militancy, about the disturbed peace of the Brahmaputra Valley, for example. And there is this rebel, against patriarchy as much as against an oppressive nature in which the genders are placed. So there is constantly an attempt to seize, what is more eternal, what is perhaps timeless, rather than dwell on things that are just from the historical moment, or just from the immediate present, or the immediate past. So I think I don't have the space to talk about individual works, but I think I just wanted to point out that many of these writers um, also have a disdain for myths that have placed women, or that have defined women in certain spaces from which they cannot escape. So there is the cynicism of the eco-critic, for example. And, if I were to refer to writers from the region, then I could talk about younger writers who use both myth uh, and the community's faith and religious beliefs, but actually go beyond, those paradigms. So there are people, Easterin Kire is wonderful. Um, Margarita, as far as the community and the shared beliefs of the community are concerned. She's not necessarily only writing as a woman, though she has a lot of women protagonists. But there is this whole idea of the replica of the cosmos. What Caroline Merchant calls um, the crown, jewels, the robe, the woman's robe, her mantle. These are all transplanted into nature. The undergarments are birds, water creatures, earth animals, herbs and trees. On her shoes are flowers. So the natura, the nature is natura, and natura, nature has been kind of made to lose its sacral value. This is what a lot of writers in the Northeast, particularly women writers, are trying to restore the sacral value. What is sacrosanct, what is basically uh, beautifully reminiscent of the unspoiled world of nature. And this, I think, brings you closer to some of the religious beliefs and some of the spiritualisms, more than religious, the spiritualisms that are inherently available in writings from this region, or in the representations, gendered representations from this region. So likewise, Mamang Dai from Arunachal Pradesh also talks about, such kinds of intersectionalities where, she traces the history of her race, Adi women, for example, which is embodied in her literary discourses. And she talks about the mountains. Oh, there are mountains. I think it's called an obscure place. She says, there are mountains. Oh, there are mountains. We climbed every slope. We slept by the river. So, brief, but so inherently, um, almost timeless. And later she says that the river has a soul. It knows. So these are spiritualisms beyond religion. You are not tied down by just one religion. Maybe the idea that a Christian faith or a Hindu custom can bring you closer to finding your essential connect with the land. These are perhaps ways, but essentially I think um, the writer over here is also a cultural historian. And this cultural historian is able to connect the community to the representations very well, leading us to a certain kind of understanding in the way we talk about our literatures, about our cultures, and how we teach them later within the academy. So I think Mamang Dai's wonderful work, a brief work which I might want to quote is, she says, the river has a soul. It's known, stretching past the town, from the first drop of rain to dry earth and mist on the mountain tops. The river knows the immortality of water. Okay? And in some ways, I think these resonate with long pasts of the long histories that we have of the region. So Mamang's writings, for example, are also a response to exploitation, to domination and devaluation of women, as well as nature by a more patriarchal society. And there is, of course, technological development, which is considered essentially masculine and is responsible for degrading and exploiting the feminine, according to feminist theory. Janice Pariat is the other writer who comes very close to religious esotericism. She's almost esoteric, the secret customs and beliefs of her people, the Khasis, originating from Meghalaya. And her fictions, the way she writes, these are very shadowy zones. Um, they dwell between the mystical and nostalgia, between spirits and serendipity, a world that is gently hewn out of the very mists that surround her own terrain. I think she creates Janice Pariat, her latest work, um, very important work that everything the light touches, 2022, is something that goes deep back into the past of the Khasi, um, the origins, rather, the mystical, the mythological, origins of the Khasi community as a community. How are they tied down together by a lore, by a belief, by a folk custom? And I think she exhibits this very well. Her writings are informed by this kind of, trope, which is very common, which is almost typical in her writings, that she captures this haunting beauty and symbolic meanings of, the smoky, hazy, sun-tempered land that they dwell in. And she captures this very inimitably of the northeastern topography. I think she's almost deifying that topography, um, in which the gendered presence is so important vis-a-vis the universal presence or portent of human beings. I might like to move to the next slide, please. Okay, so then there is Waiting for an Equal World by Patricia Mukhim, who refers to this whole idea of being of being uh, uneven, that the gendered spaces are uneven, and the perspectives change with location, that women and feminist assumptions from this region turn the narrative, but and we are meant to be, we are at least perceived to be more than equal. But her work, Patricia Mukhim, as a journalist, and she's much more politically kind of overt, rather than, people who write from literary and other cultural fields, who give you representations. But Patricia is overt. She'll give you figures and statistics, and she'll tell you how women and minorities, other ethnicities, have been dominated by hegemonic communities. And her stories are about these different unfreedoms and these different, um, you know, uh, the curbing of abilities that are still present in matrilineal spaces, surprisingly. Can I have the next slide? How much time do I have? I think you have a question answer session. Yeah, so I come back to the memorializing from the hills, the Naga Hills, Eastern Kire, A Respectable Woman, a book that I really love because it is written in the backdrop of the Kohima War, and how Eastern Kire center stages both history and memory to create, a story of women's lives and legacies from the older colonial moments to the present. So, Respectable Woman also telling us how Christian, practices allowed the women and the men to be distinct in their, habitats and in their domains, and how that might have shifted a lot of the practices of the present, of the communities of the moment. Um, but to come back, I'll just take 5 minutes and I'll sum up. Is that okay, Chubamenla?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah. So I also want to refer you back to this whole emotional geography that we have, from where we talk about spaces of women, writings, who uh, are also, which is also very closely aligned with the ideas of healing and health, for example. So, Linda Hogan, a well known Native American writer, had some time ago written about this very wonderful, native writing called The Woman Who Watches Over the World, a native memoir. The Woman Who Watches Over the World. And it's a kind of self restorative work. And it talks about concerns of a woman writer who journeys through her land and through herself. So I want to read the introduction, very brief introduction, that I just use these words. She says, self telling is rare for a Native woman, but when I work on reservations with young people, I know that there are stories of survival. It is not easy. There are no roads, no paths, no maps or directions. The cairns and the markers have been all taken away. Who knows where to step, how to find wholeness? It's not that we lost our old ways and intelligences, but that we are lost from them. They're always there, patient. So remember, when she says they're always there, we only need to return to their beauty, their integrity, their reverence for life. Until we do so, we will have restless spirits. This is the introduction to The Woman Who Watches Over the World. And this is almost a very, very deeply religious thought, I think, that you come to terms with what has been taken, but you know that there are those old things, those intelligences that are there within, that are embedded in the community, and those you need to return to, those we need to come back to. And you will notice, for that matter, that a lot of writings at the moment, representations from the community, are retellings of traumatic moments that have happened in the past, but they are also stories about the community's survival. They are bridges between personal histories, between women and a more developed environment, between self-conscious and self-reflexive, ways of looking at what one critic has called acts of environmental imagination. We must imagine this land first before we begin to tell the stories of our survival. And we need to have the concern about our fragile and vanishing worlds, our attraction for the green spaces, and the sacred bonds between the human, the religious, the mystical, the known worlds, and the unknown wilderness. So, in some ways, this is a way of coming to an approach, a gendered approach. Can I have the last slide, please? Yeah. So no, the quickly the slide before that, uh, the penultimate slide. Yeah. Territorially, we speak from feminist ecologies. We write with our lands and bodies, and that's what I was talking about. That environmental imagination. Okay. The last slide, please. Thank you very much. Yeah. So, are we an inclusive category? Are we no longer an inclusive category? Are South Asian feminisms no longer an inclusive category? We have uneven terrains. I've been talking about this, our gendered politics, our ecologies, our indigeneities, very importantly. Do they beg a feminism of our own? Is it time that we started talking about a Northeast Indian feminism, which is something that I'm writing on currently? So these are questions that I throw to the audience. How does the even the national educational policy mandate local knowledge systems as pedagogies to adopt in the academic approach? And can policies and new perspectives decolonize those top-down, assumptions that we have had so far in our gendered histories? Okay, um, yeah. So I think that's the end of the presentation. Yeah, you can take it away. Thank you very much. So I'd like to end with one very green signal that is coming on now. And this green signal comes from Nagaland, from the fact that women have struggled for a very long time to find their reservation, their representation in politics. And I think this makes it imperative, it's an imperative that shows that there is a gendered voice. The voice, the gendered voice is very, very, very sharp here. And that women, and will you might notice that all the works that I have suggested here are mostly women who are representing this dynamic shift. Okay, the shift from what was once a religiously determined patriarchy is now shifting from where women find the right connections and the right knots to, you know, open. So, in many ways, I think we are at a time which is very favorable because we have a lot of representation thanks to the Naga women's, the larger collectives that have been able to bring reservation of women even in the political arena. And now, we were in 2017, we remember witnessing a bloody struggle between women who wanted to be represented in politics and did not find the channels and the agency. And now you have that. You no longer have to struggle for that. So thank you very much. I hope that the thoughts I have thrown would give you a little more food for thought in the various papers that will
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am. I think ma'am is having some network issues, but I now open the floor for any questions. If you have any questions for our ma'am, and also if anyone would like to answer the questions that ma'am has asked in her presentation. Any questions? Okay, I think Professor Morel is having some network issues, but I think we'll end the session here. So although she's not here, I would like to thank Professor Morel on behalf of the organizing committee. Hi, ma'am. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there are no questions, so I think we'll end the session here.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you so much, ma'am. On behalf of the organizing committee and our college, we would like to thank you for delivering such an inspiring and thought provoking keynote address. Your insights on politics of representations, feminism in academy, feminist literatures, and its pedagogy in the Northeast India have been very enlightening and impactful. And I believe that it has left a very lasting impression on us all. We deeply appreciate the time and effort you've dedicated to preparing and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. Your expertise has truly enriched our event and provided valuable perspectives that we will carry forward. Thank you once again for being a part of our program and for your outstanding contribution. We look forward to future opportunities for collaboration with you. Thank you so much, ma'am. I would also
Thank you,
like to
Shubhamendla.
inform
Yes.
I would also like to inform the attendees that the next session will start at 10 a.m. The same link will be used for this event, and I request everyone to join after this short break. We will start at 10 a.m. Thank you so much. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, organizers of Tetso College of the seminar. Thank you, Chubamenla. Thank you very much, the Department of English and ICSSR for having me. Thanks. Bye bye.